Whether you're a one-person business or a 1,000-person business, every single company needs to know how to work in teams effectively, whether that be through outsourced teams, through contractors, or internal teams with a large employee workforce. Knowing how to get the best out of your people and to foster those relationships is essential if you want to create a fast-growing company. This is particularly the case with marketing, where you have different areas involved in the marketing process, from creatives to copywriters to the more technical side, whether that be on SEO or media buying. Having those different types of people and different skill sets functioning together and in alignment is going to be absolutely essential to the success of your marketing efforts and marketing campaigns, and even any area of your business. Well, in this video today, I sat down with Tom and Alex from Excel Communications, and Excel work with some of the biggest companies in the world, from the likes of Netflix to Bookings.com, to help develop their leaders and to create high-performing teams through a range of learning and development programs. So regardless of whether you're a team of 2 or 2,000 right now, you are going to get a ton of value from this interview. And make sure you stick around to the end, because there are some absolute gold nuggets of insights from here that you can take away and start applying today to help you get the most out of your teams and your people. Let's get into it. Hello, Tom and Alex.
Hi, Tom. Great
How
name.
are you guys doing? It is a great name, isn't it? All the best people are called Tom. No offense, Alex.
Can I launch an early rebuttal? I don't agree.
There's no Alexes here to back you up.
No,
mate,
I mean, you two are great. I'm not saying that, but
Cheers, mate.
just fly the Alex flag a little bit.
Do we not want to throw in the dad joke here?
What's that?
You're never going to get lost with us, Tom.
Oh,
Hey.
I like it.
Hey.
No.
Love it. Cool. So we're talking high-performing teams. So firstly, what's your definition of a high-performance team? Like, what does that look like? What does it mean? What does it allow for businesses? Why is it important?
So, not the easiest question to answer off the bat. What does a high-performing team look like? Have you got one ready for this?
I would say that key to a high-performing team is alignment. So teams, obviously, one of the things that we set out with high-performing teams is a list of characteristics that you would typically see in a team that are performing to their optimum. So I suppose the brief definition I would give is it's a group of people that are aligned in their vision, their purpose, but also display those characteristics on a daily basis. And I mean, I could go into the characteristics, but it feels like I'll be talking for about 20, 30 minutes. I'm certain we'll get into that anyway, but
Yeah,
I don't know if
probably.
you want to add to that.
Well, I think if you were to whip out a textbook, there would be something along the lines of a high-performing team is one that achieves strategic speed. So
Strategic speed.
yeah, one of our trainers who I would consider to be a real expert on this, that would be his definition. And then the obvious question from that is, well, what does strategic speed mean?
It sounds good.
It does
Whatever
sound
it
good.
is.
So maybe we should just leave it there. But if you are a high performing team, strategic speed means, I guess, literally what the words are, right? So you will have a strategy, you will have a vision you're trying to achieve as a team. The strategy falls from that. And if you can move fast to deliver that strategy as a group of people, that is a high performing team.
It's interesting because, I mean, those two words, they almost do sound like, you almost think there's a sacrifice, right, between like speed and going fast, but not letting things fall apart. So I guess that's why it's kind of like, it sounds quite attractive, because it's like strategy is often seen as this like cumbersome, heavy process driven thing where it slows everything down, and then maybe you don't have that speed. So it's quite interesting that you're kind of, I guess, almost lubricating the process, right? The system, allowing teams to kind of work better together. That's a really interesting way of putting it. And so what's like, because obviously this is the thing, right? With so many businesses these days, there's been a lot of changes, even with like COVID and stuff like that, everything that's happened in the world. You know, some companies have shrunk their teams, some companies have grown their teams, some are using more like outsource versus internal. What are some of the most common challenges that you guys see, like when you're working with teams, like, and has that changed over the past few years?
Has it changed? Yeah, I mean the challenges being thrown in, and the almost the challenges that are fashionable at the moment, and I mean fashionable as in the ones that are most sort of common, have probably changed. You know, it is things like you say from COVID. What's changed? Well, we're still however many years later in that battle of what does remote working look like. So, you know, it is very relevant as a high performing team. Can you have a remote high performing team, or do you have to be in an office? You know, the answers won't be the same for everybody. But ultimately, if you're talking, you know, and I'm talking in a business context here, of have the challenges changed? Probably not. I think they probably come thicker and faster at the moment, which is where that strategic speed comes back in. Because if you have a truly high performing team, you know what the strategy is, but you can move fast. Then at the moment, you're getting curveballs left, right, and center, right? Like, you know, there's a million memes out there about if you're of a certain age at the moment, in the last 10 years, you've been through however many economic recessions, you've been through a pandemic, you've been through this and that. We're currently in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We've got climate considerations being thrown at us. So it feels like there are more and more challenges coming faster and faster. So actually, I think the importance of a high performing team is that much greater now, because you need to be able to be agile and adapt fast. And that's where that high performance thing comes in, and the speed thing comes in. You know, back in the day, whether the challenges were any different or whether we just didn't know about them is a whole different debate. But the ability to react fast is now more important than ever. Tech being thrown in there. So again, if you're in a business and AI is coming in, how are you adapting to it? Whatever the thing is, you have to be able to move fast. And therefore, you need a higher performing team, I think, to be able to handle that. So I think it's more important now than it's ever been.
Interesting. And I think, because that got me thinking that, and I think I saw you guys did a piece of content on this a little while ago around like how do you know, like like the team is maybe the bottleneck, like maybe they're not performing optimally, maybe it's communication, maybe it's leadership challenges, whatever it is. Like what's the kind of process you would go through to diagnose that? Like if a company is, I don't know, maybe their revenues are down, maybe they're kind of struggling to get momentum in a certain area. How do you kind of know, okay, this is like a learning and development problem in our team? Like how would you kind of diagnose that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think one of the things that I found out is actually how often do you answer certain questions about your team. So some of the questions that we pose, like in that piece of content specifically, are they things that you're regularly asking yourself? I think it needs to become a process of almost checking in terms of at any stage, there's always room to improve. You know, your team could be performing, but there's always ways in which you can optimize. There's always things that you could do to just improve certain areas. So I think it actually is a process of regularly asking yourself questions about, okay, right, team performance, because it's fluid as well. It can improve. It could quickly, if it's not taken care of and if you're not developing constantly, it can quickly fall by the wayside as well in certain areas. So I think it's just good practice to especially with that piece of content, obviously early plug if you want to use it. But if you do ask yourself and you know, ask the team the questions around communication and you know, how they're working with each other regularly, then you'll have a good idea of where you're at and where potentially you can look to improve. Because I think the thing is, everyone could do that. I think every team, even if you believe you're performing at your best, it's always good to check, and it's always good to do it just to see, because there's always things that we could improve.
100%. And the reality is, there's not a one answer to the question.
Yeah, sure.
Because it depends on your situation. It could be as simple as a leader of a team or an individual within the team, does this feel like it's high performing, or does it feel like there's room for improvement? That might be the only indicator you need to say, well, we need to do a little bit of work on it. You don't become high performing without working at it. So if it doesn't feel good, then do something about it. But then you can go the full other end of the scale where, you know, we work in tech companies all the time. So everyone's got KPIs, OKRs, whatever you want to call them. If you're not achieving the things that you've set out, probably because the team's not performing optimally. If you are losing traction in your industry, is that because you haven't got that speed element where you can adapt to the challenges being thrown at you? So, there's a whole scale from what you feel inside your heart all the way through to hard data points.
Yeah.
And ultimately, all businesses are built on teams, right? I doubt there's a successful business out there that's truly a one-man band, right? Or a one-woman band. But,
Even if they outsource, it's still like a...
well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess a quick answer would be, if you're not working on your team, it probably needs work. So maybe that's a quick answer.
Yeah, true. Like, it's like a garden, I guess, isn't it? Like, if you're not watering the plants.
And it's interesting as well, because I think one of the things that can create blind spots is individual performance. Fairly often, if you get good results in a team, how much of it is down to the team performance and how much of it is down to the individual performance of a few members. So I think it's also, because quite often you could think, okay, we maybe achieved that thing we wanted to achieve, but did we all complement each other in doing it? Was it kind of more some than others? Like, it's always interesting, I think, even when you do achieve things, to potentially look at how, because there's always ways in which you could have done even better. In terms of the dynamics of those great individuals within that team collective.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, Tom, about the kind of like working from home, remote teams versus like in-office teams. And you said there's no like, there's no kind of one size fits all, right, for every business. And I've kind of heard that before. Like, you've got people like, is it like Elon Musk, where he kind of said everyone has to, but to an extent, you can see that with some companies. Like, okay, well, I get that for some companies, they, would make sense for people to come into the office. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what are the kind of things that would mean a company need to kind of be more in person versus like remote? Have you seen that a lot in different companies you guys work with?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a level of opinion on here. Well, I can't, you can't answer that with a fact, because again, I don't think there's a one size fits all.
Yeah. But
if you distill it down to the human brain, right? We're pack animals. We like being together, and if you want creativity, you want to bounce ideas around, you want to feel a sense of belonging, then I think having points where you bring people together is critically important. So, the question on what do I see in my clients? Well, if we have creative clients, so we work in media quite a lot, or back on into tech, where agile ways of working. If they're going to be creative, if they're going to create the next ad campaign for one of their clients that's really exciting and creative, I do believe that bringing people together into a space and getting that kind of feel that you don't get in remote working is really, really important. Whereas if it's a lot more kind of process-driven tactical working, then actually being at home and having the piece around you to plug into your spreadsheets, whatever, is probably a more productive way of doing it. So, yeah, I definitely think to be creative, you need it. I think what you definitely can't do is just take what you did in an office and then move that into the remote space. That you can be a truly high-performing team remotely. But you need to be a remote high-performing team.
So you have to adapt.
You have to adapt. You have to do things differently. And you could do it and never meet each other. You can still get there, but you can't do it in the same ways as before. So I think you have to kind of think about what you want in terms of, and it's broader. Like, think about your company culture. Do you want people to come together or not? Like, there's so many factors at play. And the reality is, a lot of companies are falling on the blend, which probably is the most effective for the majority of companies. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah. No, because like you say, it's one of those things where it's not really, there isn't a kind of right or wrong answer to that question, right? But I was interested to hear your thoughts in terms of what you'd seen and also like what some of the factors are. Because I think that makes a lot of sense, in that companies would want to have a balance,
Yeah,
depending
absolutely.
on like what are we trying to achieve here? Like what are we working on? Because there's going to be different.
Absolutely. And that's as a company, but also as a team. Like I know, I have friends who are being told they have to be in the office 3 days a week, and they come into the office and they sit on video calls all day. Well, that's stupid, right?
Yeah.
Like, what if you're going to be in person? Make sure you do stuff like do the in-person stuff. That's when you do the
Yeah.
brainstorming. You have the meetings where you're building bonds with each other, being creative, whatever the case may be. So yeah, if you want people to connect, then bring them into a space, and if they don't need to connect, don't.
It's a really interesting point because I think as well there was for a lot of companies there was almost a lot of like animosity created after lockdown, particularly when people got a taste for remote working.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a bit of an expectation now of like, I want that flexibility. So to say you have to all come into the office and then, like you say, you're just sitting on video calls all day doesn't really make sense. And I suppose even in what you're saying, though, that is an example of a high performing team, right? One where, okay, we're going to get everyone together and there's a reason we're getting everyone together because it's going to, in this particular instance, in this circumstance, it's going to help us operate better.
Yeah.
Or achieve this outcome better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of looking at it. So I guess like what you're saying there is like, it's almost like, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve, and does this make more sense remote, or does it make more sense?
Absolutely. You're going to apply that to so many things, but
Yeah.
If we're talking about components of a high performing team, you should all be united behind a single vision. There'll be a load of stuff that sits under that, but again, you've got a purpose for it. So if bringing people together helps you move towards that vision because you want to be creative or you want to be closer knit or whatever the case may be, then bringing people together makes sense. If the reason is you signed a 10-year lease on an office, so therefore it makes sense to force people to come into it, well, that's a stupid decision. That's a sunk cost that you need to suck up and move on and think, well, do things deliberately, not just because you have to.
That's a really interesting point, because I think that comes back to kind of what you were saying, Alex, as well, about how you kind of want to check in with yourself, like whether you are, somebody in the leadership team. It's almost like why am I making this decision? Am I making it because of some sunk cost fallacy, or am I making it because it's aligned with the vision and the strategic, like what are we trying to achieve here? It's a really interesting point. I guess you almost have to constantly, like you say, be checking in with yourself and asking yourself, like, why, what is the reason behind this decision?
Yeah. And people being different and having different preferences, I mean, it's a great thing because it creates diversity, but it also does make things a lot more complex when it comes to this, because obviously, if you go back to COVID and that change happened where people were returning back, there was a lot of different responses. Some people couldn't wait to be back around people to feed off the energy and to collaborate. And some people, they just wanted to stay in their pajamas and stay indoors because that's how they were more productive.
Yeah.
So, I always think that communication and checking in and just getting a kind of grasp of the preferences is key. But another thing about virtual working is if you're getting performance out of individuals, when we're all in person, I think, kind of naturally we all know how to operate a little bit. With the working independently, it's all a little bit new. And I mean, we've had years of it now, so there's an adjustment. But at the same time, it's really key when we say about purpose and making sure we're all aligned in that people know how they can perform remotely as well. I think we've had conversations about it in the past about people knowing how they can perform in a team remotely. When we're all in person, hopefully we all know each other quite well. It's easy to bounce off and easy to kind of make things happen. Whereas when you're remote, when do you reach out to a person? How do you collaborate? What processes are in place in order to make this happen? So that's another thing I think to bear in mind is individuals have their preferences, but also there needs to be a clear vision behind if we are a team that are going to operate separately, how's that going to work? What's our responsibilities individually? How do we all make this successful?
What are your thoughts on? I mean, this is I'm sure there's no kind of right or wrong answer here, but I keep seeing these like ads, like on Slack, like everyone's using Slack these days, and I keep seeing these like apps for Slack where it's like automating the check-in process for teams, And it's like, you never have to worry about checking in with your teams again. And it kind of like sends them like a survey. It's like a chat bot, and it sends your team out a survey. It's like, how are you feeling today? How are you doing? And it's kind of like, blimey, it's like taking away that human element of like actually just having a chat with someone. Have you seen those?
I haven't. No, I haven't. But I know what you mean.
It's kind of scary. Like,
it is kind of scary. I don't know, but then I can see the point of it to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think there's a balance with any of that stuff, isn't there? It's kind of like, it's like any form of automation. You can kind of overdo it.
Well, yeah, and it's how do you keep it authentic? Because that's the important part behind it, right? If I'm like, for me, actually, could the idea of checking in with all my team and just seeing how they're feeling, automating that, could that be a good thing? Because then if everybody comes back and says good, oh, but person X says, actually, I'm feeling a bit rubbish today,
that opens a door for
me to say, right, I need to go and do something.
Yeah.
But then, is it authentic because of the people that said good? Are they actually good because do they know it's an automation? And so it's a very tricky one.
Yeah,
it's a very tricky one. It'll come back to company cultures again. Like, could a well-being check-in that's automated every morning work in a culture? Yeah, absolutely, it could. Just so that you're trying to highlight flags, as long as you know there's genuine and authentic thought behind it. Whereas if it is literally a box ticking exercise, then would have the opposite effect, wouldn't it?
True.
It is really interesting though, as a person receiving like a chat bot, how are you? Because quite often your response to the question, how are you doing, depends on the person asking it anyway. Because there's certain people that you'll just be naturally more honest with.
That's a good point.
You'll open up and things like that. Whereas AI automated messages, I'm not going to tell an AI chat, even if I know it's going to someone that probably is going to read
darkest feelings.
Yeah, if you're using a middle, like a third party to ask how I am, I'm not going to give you probably what I'd give you if you came to me yourself.
No, and that's not what I'm saying. But if like, I'm quite a task orientated person, so where I could see it working is if Alex gets a message in the morning saying, how you doing? Or how are you doing out of 10? And he gives me a 2. I then need to, as a real person, not with the automation, then go, what's going on, mate? Like, is there anything I can do to help?
My robot friend tells me you've got problems.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Again, though, it's all built into your culture as a team, as a business. Al was saying then about having ways of communicating and established ways of operating. That would be part of a high performing team. So if that has become part of your established ways of working, because it's a check-in, but there's genuine thought and feeling behind it, then fine. But if you just suddenly started doing it one morning, then not so. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Because I guess as well, like, there is an element of, like, to what you were saying there, Alex, about, like, you wouldn't necessarily want to just share everything with this AI, but I guess there's an element of, like, where you're anonymous effectively, and I think for some people they might even feel like, if your line manager, your direct report is asking how you are, there is sometimes an element of like, oh well, I don't want to say I've got all these problems, and do you know what I mean? I
think it comes down to consistency a little bit, because if for instance, like, if your direct manager asked how you were and they don't ask very often, then potentially you would think the relationship isn't there to be able to do this. Whereas I think that's what, like, again, with the AI kind of systems or chatbot, if you did use that, that's one of the downsides, is that really kind of good part of a leadership relationship, which is having a good interpersonal connection and feeling like you can talk to people. Like, that creates such a problem, because if you're using something else to potentially create a bigger wedge, then it would become strange then if that person comes to you directly and asks how you were. But I think it's repetition. If you know that you have that kind of relationship with your direct line, like, that you can answer that question and there's that relationship already established. Whereas if it's kind of those sporadic, almost seems targeted, I'm not quite sure why I'm being asked this, then I get why it would be uncomfortable. But I think it comes down to just knowing that relationship exists within the dynamic that you have.
Yeah.
So I'll throw something in here because I think this is where it's going with what Alex is saying is, if you ask me to distill one component down which creates a high performing team. Now, if you go into the textbooks, I think there's 16 components as defined by Lencioni or someone. But if you were to distill it down to one thing that can create, or you have to have for a high performing team, and it's psychological safety.
Interesting.
So by definition, we're saying a team is a number of people, right? However big that team wants to be. Psychological safety is the key to performance. It's what underpins everything. So, what Alex is saying there around the check-ins and things, if there's psychological safety between us, and I've said to him, like, I'm going to put in this automated check-in with you because I want you to have an opportunity to tell me if there's something going on. If we're at the point where our relationship is so tight and like I know him so well that I know he can say anything he wants to me, and I can say I haven't got time to physically check in with all my team every morning, but know that if you come back with anything other than I'm cool, I'll jump on that phone with you. Like the psychological safety that underpins our relationship is the thing that outweighs it all.
That's a really interesting. Like, psychological safety is not the thing that you would often associate with. I think it's weird, and maybe this is like a mindset thing for me, but when you think about kind of high performance team, you kind of think about like motivation and drive, and like even the word safety, it makes so much sense. Like, now that you're talking about it, like, absolutely it makes sense, but I guess that's quite an easy thing to overlook.
100%. And it's also something that it's not it's underpinned by feelings and emotions, and how do you create psychological safety in a team? Well, you've got to get to know each other on quite a deep level. That can be really uncomfortable for some people. For some people, it's not. They're quite happy sharing all those kind of feelings. But for a lot, it isn't, and it's completely underpinned by emotions. And if you think about, once you have that foundation of all sorts, I feel like I can probably just make no sense here. So I'll try and bring it around. But you can throw in loads of business buzzwords, right? Emotional intelligence. We all recognize emotional intelligence is important. That might be being able to read your body language in an instant. If I've built up a relationship with you over time, like I will be more intuitive to you and your emotions and how you're feeling at a point. But also, you're more open with sharing back to me. So it becomes a two-way piece.
Yeah.
Like, you're happy to say, I'm feeling really shitty today because, I don't know, my dog was poorly. Right, real silly example. But if I've built that psychological safety, then it just underpins everything. I feel like I'm not given this its just deserves here, because it's so important. Like, if you're going to move... If you have a psychological safe environment, anyone can say anything to anybody. And that might be, Tom, I love what you've done here. It's a really good job. And it might be, Tom, it's not good enough. I'm holding you accountable. Like, and if I say that to you in a psychologically safe environment, clearly, if you want to go into the detail of feedback, saying something's not good enough is not very good feedback. I need to be specific and all these other stuff. But the point is, I can say to you good things, bad things. I can agree with you. I can disagree with you, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's almost like if you've created that kind of base, that foundation, you've then set the tone for everything. So I guess you can get away with you can almost get away with saying that was crap.
100%.
If somebody feels safe, because it's then
100%.
Yeah.
I know I can say to Alex, like, I'm feeling really grumpy today, and just leave me be, or whatever. And he's not going to be thinking, oh, have I done something to upset him? He knows that I'm just being honest with him. And so for me, psychological safety underpins everything in a high performing team. At some point, we're going to get into a sport analogy here, because you can't talk about high performing teams.
I'm amazed we've got this far in without one at the moment, to be honest.
I sat on the train this morning thinking we can't just talk about sports teams for the whole time. But, if you look at, if there are football fans on the weekend, Mo Salah and Jurgen Klopp arguing at football for the Liverpool game, right? You don't see people arguing where there is complete psychological safety. You will get people disagreeing, and actually you might get people disagreeing more, but that won't happen on the sideline of a match. So something's going on there. So they're not, and you can see in their results, they're not performing at an elite level. So something's going on there where the psychological safety's been rocked. For them to have that little fight on the sidelines, and so they need to figure out what's going on there and to build it back up.
Yeah. Well, and you can tell that there's a break in that discussion, because whilst not being privy to the information and transcripts and all of that, you can assume by body language and things like that what they're saying to each other probably isn't constructive.
Yeah.
So that's exactly how you know that, it's beyond that point.
Whereas if they have, which they will have done in the past, so clearly they just need to do a bit of work on the team, is if they were in a psychologically safe environment, therefore they had the emotional intelligence and the trust, and they could have that conversation, but they'd maybe not have it on the sideline. They'd maybe have it in a lot more calm, less emotional way. It might be they're saying the same thing. Like, we don't know what they said to each other. You could say the same thing, but in a different way, and one would be constructive and one wouldn't. So I don't know if I'm wandering here or if it's making sense, but
no, it definitely makes sense. And I think like it's such an interesting one, because again, it's not something you would think of, but it does make sense as being such a foundational thing for people to be operating at their best, right? One of the other things that I wanted to come on to was how and I guess this kind of also brings in that psychological safety element as well, is like there's definitely, I think, more and more teams, because businesses have had to open up to remote working, and a lot of the time, and that's good in a way because it's opened up like a global workforce, right? You've got talent all over the world, and one of the things with working in a global team, if anyone, whether you're using kind of contractors, whether you have an employed team globally, there's different cultures, right? And like sometimes the interpretation of things in different cultures is very different. So how do you kind of create that psychological safety whilst also, I guess, being mindful of maybe cultural differences and how like things are interpreted and stuff? Do you guys ever see that, like where for teams that are maybe international or working with different countries, like how?
I mean, yeah, big time.
Really? Okay.
Quite often it's the thing that can underpin dysfunctional teams is that they've not done that cultural adjustment across borders. I think of one client, big tech company that we would all recognize, and they had a global payments team, and they're saying this team we just don't like each other. We just don't get on across all the world. We have a European team, a US team, and an APAC team in Singapore, and we just don't get on. Like person X, he's a idiot. I don't like him. The US team, they do all these things. The reality was they hadn't broken down their cultural borders. They were like, APAC would say, well, why does the US do it like this? It's stupid what they do. The reality was it was such a cultural change. Like in Europe, they had flexible working, and the processes were a bit looser because that's how they'd evolved as a European team. They were then got moved into this global team where in the US, it's a very different working environment around holidays and stuff. They didn't have flexible working, so therefore their processes seemed a lot more rigid, and they didn't work together. It was two cultures fighting each other. So, and what they hadn't done, which is where your question I think is really good, is they hadn't worked on the ability to have those conversations, or they didn't have the psychological safety to say, we do it this way because you do it this way because what can we learn from you, or what can we learn from each other, and where do we need to be able to figure out how we can work together, and where do we not?
Interesting. Yeah.
But because all they'd seen was America's stupid, US, and then America thinks Europe's stupid, and everyone thinks APAC's stupid, they hadn't had that conversation. And it seems really simple when you say it. They hadn't had the conversation to say, why do we all do it how we do it? And what can we learn? And we don't have to completely align, but we will on some bits. So,
But it is one of those interesting oversights, though, isn't it? Because I suppose in the moment, gaining an understanding of different people in different areas and different regions and the different ways of doing things, because it doesn't seem to drive those tangibles that, you know, often get prioritized because they're seen as the most important things, just forget about doing it. So there's so many questions that are left unanswered, so many kind of conversations that aren't had, which then can make key differences that ultimately make a change in the end. So it is really interesting to just hear that, yeah, obviously people just don't think about doing it. It might not even cross their mind. Just, we'll just crack on and work from day one and just begin as we are.
yeah, definitely. See it in big companies and suddenly say, oh, we're moving from a regional model to a global model. Go and make it happen. And then you don't do the foundational piece of getting to know each other.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing there, though, like, because even with like more localized regional teams, like, there's almost like another layer of that, right? Like that we talk about in like a cultural sense, but also even just with different like personality types. And this is something like, you know, Jane and I, like co-founders of the business, like Jane is very, very different. She's very kind of process driven, operational. I'm the complete opposite, right? I'm the more kind of creative type, head in the clouds. And it is one of those things like when we first started working together, it was like, what? Like we were both just so baffled by like, why would you do things that way? And, you know, she was thinking the same with me, I was thinking the same with her. And you do, and, you know, I've noticed as we've been building out our team and you have, and, you know, I guess in marketing, but for any business where you do have the kind of creatives,
Yeah.
you know, and then you have the kind of implementers almost who are the process ones, and that in itself can kind of become like this friction point because those two different personalities, personas, whatever you want to call them, have to work together, right? But then like if you don't understand each other, and that's kind of like the journey that, you know, we've had to go on, is kind of like understanding like, oh, wow, there's actually like a magic in the way you're doing this. And I guess that's the same with cultures as well, right? It's like, oh, actually, that's a really interesting, you know, and I can see the value in that.
Yeah.
How do you kind of go about almost, I don't know if teaching it out people is the right word, but kind of creating that kind of culture of, I guess, recognizing the value that different individuals, different teams, different, you know, regions bring. Like, how do you?
So I think there's actually probably quite a clear process on that. The first one being you have to have self-aware individuals before you worry about understanding everything in the world. Do you understand yourself? Like, do you know
That's a really good point? Yeah.
what your preferences are? Like, clearly, instinctually, you think you know, but do you actually? Like, do you actually know that you're a little bit erratic because you have all these creative tendencies? And do you know that you don't give enough detail, or you give too much detail, or whatever? So, step one is you need self-aware individuals. Once you have self-aware individuals, you can then start to, generally, I think the easiest way is to then put it into some sort of model to realize that whether you're looking at social styles, MBTI, discovery insights, Belbin, there are 1,000 psychometrical behavioral models out there. Ultimately, just pick one you like and crack on with it. And we do prefer social styles, just so you know. Then once you are self-aware, you can see that everybody has certain preferences within these models. You're not set, but you have preferences, and you can then understand where other people sit in those preferences, because largely you can generalize people. So in your example with Jane, I've never met Jane, but from what I'm guessing, if you were to move this into a discovery insights or a psychosocial styles thing, you know, you're quite an excitable, creative, high energy person. So you would be sitting on that side of the task if you were in social styles. Whereas if she loves the detail and she has all these processes, then she sits on the complete opposite of a vertical axis. And if you were building that out into a bigger team, you can see that, oh, well, that person sits there and that person sits there. So step one being self-awareness, you can then be aware of others and where they sit in respect to you. The step after that is then how do you adapt your style to others? And when you start moving into high-performing teams, how do you all adapt your styles to each other? So in my mind, that's the answer to that, because that is about personal preferences, but your cultural things will come out of that. And by going through that process, you will also build a lot. Like if you do it as a group, you will start building that psychological safety. You realize that you're not an idiot for doing something the way you do it. Actually, that's amazing, because I would never think of doing it that way. So you start to embrace the diversity and use it to your advantage rather than seeing it as a barrier.
It's the self-awareness in particular is interesting, because I think we all go into social encounters with things we're looking to achieve and get out of them. And I think without the self-awareness, it's very easy to just assume that because you've ticked all your boxes from an interaction with another person, that it was a successful interaction. And you could quickly go around just assuming that every interaction you're having, because it feels great for you, has been a good one. Whereas, when you gain that self-awareness, you start to understand, actually, it's a two-way thing. Well, more than two ways sometimes if you're in group settings. This is mutual. Every time I leave with what I'm getting, is it actually benefiting the team at all? It's benefiting me 100%. I'm leaving with everything I wanted. But if I'm leaving other people feeling a bit shortchanged by any interaction we have, then ultimately for the collective, I'm not probably being as effective as I think I am.
Yeah, definitely. It's that whole treat other people how you'd like to be treated. Yeah. That's rubbish if you ask me. It's good. It's great for kids. Before they really set themselves up, before they really understand themselves, it's great. Don't smash someone else's toys if you don't want them to smash yours. Fine. When you're an adult, and particularly once you're a professional, you treat other people how they want to be treated.
Yeah.
Because you're then starting to look at the world through their lens, not yours.
Yeah, I like that. It's an interesting way of looking at it. I think, do you know what's really funny as well? I was thinking, like, when I've worked at companies in the past and they've had psychometric assessments, it's quite interesting that, like, I had never seen the other side of that. Like, they do the assessment and then you're kind of like, well, where does that go? Like, who's seeing that? And you mentioned about, like, the members in the team kind of understanding, oh, this person I sit next to, my colleague, this is what they fall into and this is how I can work better with them. I was never given that. Like, I did a psychometric assessment almost like I'm just made to feel like a guinea pig to go through this whole thing. And then you're kind of like, what even happens with this data? Like, who am I feeding it to?
Yeah.
And that's really interesting that you say, like, actually, no, there should be like a level of kind of transparency to help the whole, not just like, oh, this is all going up to the CEO and it just sits in their little drawer, it's like.
No, 100%. It's not pointless doing it just for yourself. It's really fascinating. From a team perspective, that's where the magic is. That's where the magic is, right? Yeah. Like, do the assessment. Again, it doesn't matter what it is. They all come from probably the same half a dozen studies back in the 60s and 70s, right?
It has got massively overcomplicated now. But so
do it and plot it. They've all probably got an axis. Plot it on the wall so you can see where everyone in your team is. And even better, do the exercise together. This is one of our most common workshops we run is around the social stars one, and that's just getting people to do it together. And you can do stupid stuff like role plays on playing somebody else's preferences. So you start to understand your second positioning into their places. That is where the magic happens. It's understanding everybody else's views. And it is also where, if it is feeding up into the management, you can use those things to create teams, because ultimately, again, depending on what your vision is, what you're trying to achieve, a perfect rounded team would be picking someone or some people from each different style in whatever model you're using and putting them together, because then you are encouraging people to maximize their strengths and mitigate weaknesses by having other people's strengths being those weaknesses. Right, so you can create a well-rounded team. But equally, if you have a specific task that requires certain skill sets, like, I don't know, if you're creating a high-performing team of accountants, you're going to want a balance actually way over on the analytical side. So you maybe don't want a balanced team. You want to deliberately skew it. If you're in media and you want a creative team, you don't want loads of analytical people that are going to find all the flaws in your plan. You want more creative people on the other side of the scale. You probably want some that think about where you might go wrong.
Yeah.
But that's probably not where you want the balance to be. So that's the power of it, is once you start looking at it in a team. Otherwise, it's just really interesting. But the power is looking at it as a collective and as a how humans work together.
I like what you mentioned about, because I guess there's an element of it as well where it's kind of like by having everyone knowing like what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, it's not even so much strengths and weaknesses, it's just kind of how these people operate. Like it creates better kind of, it's almost like all of the, like you say, there's all of these different models out there. I guess really they're just a tool for understanding. Yeah. It doesn't really matter what you call this person or that person or where they are on this, on this graph. It's just like, it just helps people to understand each other a bit better and where they're coming from. And like you say, see things from their perspective.
100%.
Yeah.
If you're aware, you know other people better. In our team, and I'm not saying we're the highest performing team in the world, but we know a lot of this stuff, right? So in our team, we view social styles, and that model also looks at what happens when you're stressed. And generally when you're stressed, you just go stronger into your style. So for me, again, task-orientated person, if I'm under a lot of pressure and I'm feeling a lot of stress, I forget all the niceties. I don't do the, how are you this morning? How are you feeling? All that goes by the wayside. I'm like, right, where are we at? What are we doing next? What are the next steps? What needs to be done? What we do, or we try to do, is if I know I'm in that mode because I am self-aware and I've rung up Alex, I'm like, I'm in full red mode now. Just bear with me. Come along for the ride. Boom, this is what I need to know. But I've then told him so he can give me a little bit of leeway that day to allow me to do that, because that's what I need in that moment. And on another day, he might come to me and do something the same. So
yeah, I think that's the interesting thing as well about doing things like social styles together, is that I know what your style looks like in you. So I can conceptualize, like knowing what I am, it's good trivia, know more about myself. Ultimately, I am the way I am. The only way that that's going to change me is I become more self-aware about the way that I act. But unless I know more about the people around me.
So there's like quizzes on Facebook. It's like, what are you?
Yeah, what type of potato are you or something? Okay, great. How much this is limited in terms of how much I can actually do with this. Whereas when you have conversations with other people that are the other end of a scale or completely in different regions of the spectrum, it's more interesting to find out about, how specifically that looks in you. Because I can imagine if, you're more task focused, but that can mean a million things. And, you still might have loads of preferences within that. Whereas I know the ways in which you work that are more task driven and the things that you do in order to, kind of fulfill what style you are. So knowing it on an individual basis as well and talking to people is a really good way of just learning about all the things that aren't natural to you and then learning how to adjust.
I guess the nice thing about all of that is, all of this, it kind of bridges it back to that point you're making about psychological safety.
Yep.
Right? Like
100%.
when you know what your teams fall in, it's like you were saying, like if you're in kind of full on task mode, you feel comfortable in even saying that because your team know.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And it's not like, can they trust me? Can they not? It's like, no, they know that's...
But it's like, because that conversation's happened, if we join a call and you go, I'm in full red, let's just go. I don't sit there and think, he doesn't care how I am. All right, I'll just go get lost. Because we've had that, there's that understanding already. That's why those conversations are so important.
Yeah, and like you said, it's where the magic happened is the fact that we've been through learning that particular model together. So actually that process of learning it together is a really great way to build psychological safety in a team. It's a really nice way to get to know each other. So although you are learning something so you can get the finance director to sign it off, actually just picking one of those and doing it as a group is a great way to start breaking down barriers and start moving the performance of your team on, because it will factor into how you communicate, how you deal with stress, how you delegate tasks to whom in a team because you know where preferences lie and stuff like that.
Love that. Yeah, I like how this has all kind of gone full circle. Like that's pretty cool. But it makes so much sense, like how it all kind of underpins all of it. That kind of understanding that leads to that kind of psychological safety, and it kind of opens up that door. What about for not just remote working, but what about for for companies where maybe they're working or very reliant on external vendors or contractors? Like how do you create that same level of understanding? Because you're not necessarily, like, if you're working with third parties or contractors, you're not going to be you're not necessarily going to be putting them through psychometric assessments. I mean, some companies might have things like that in place, but for a lot of the time you're not going to. So how do you ever see that in teams where they do have a lot of kind of external support as well as internal, and how do you create that same culture even externally as well?
It's a good question. I mean, I guess I will see this in terms of the fact that where we sit, we are a supplier to our companies, right? So where I see that is, how do we build that level of psychological safety and things? So, and our aim is to not be seen as a supplier. It is to be seen as a trusted partner. So we are a part of the team. We happen to have two different P&Ls, but we want to work together. So how do you do it together? I mean, if you've created a team that's very self-aware and has that emotional intelligence, if you've been through those models yourself, that whole piece of adapting then your style to the client, you do this you can do this in a sales context where the second you sit on a call with someone, you figure out what you think their style is, and therefore you can adapt your communication and the way you work to them. So I think as a going through a sales cycle, and then once you start building a relationship with people, if you are skilled enough to know that you can just do it for them, no, that's not the wrong. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Whether anyone else listening knows what I mean is a different question. But again, if you have highly skilled people that are very self-aware of themselves, and then you become aware of others, which you'll have started to do in that team piece where you've looked at what everyone in your team is, you're then instinctively learning how to adapt to other people's styles, and you'll be looking for it. And then that's how you can start to build those same relationships. I think if you are really wanting to move into a trusted partnership with other people and other teams, maybe there are times where you do have to say, we need to do something to form a closer partnership. If that's the kind of relationship you're after, there's plenty of people out there who don't need those. They do just want to be a supplier. But if you want to be close, then you need to build psychological safety with people. We have to be at a point. If what we do in training is going to work, there are times when we have to be able to say to a client, what you want isn't going to work, or we don't believe what you want is going to work, and we would recommend doing it a different way.
Yeah, but I think, even if, because you joke about like how if that's what you kind of want from it, but I think if, like, most companies do want high performing teams, right? So whether, again, it's internal teams or external teams, you want it to be, because it's gonna bring down other areas of the business. It's the same thing, even when, like, we're working with clients as well. It's a similar thing where we kind of like, if there is a kind of breakdown in communication, or there's not, like, that kind of smooth communication between us, then things start to fall apart. You have to be on the same wavelength. And I think you're right. Like, it does actually, like, thinking about it now, it does a lot of the time come down to that psychological safety. And, like, as weird as it might sound, like, even, like, just talking about that now, it sounds like, what, like, psychological safety? Is it like, is it really that? But when you think about it, it really is, because it's like, in order to get the best out of people, and if there is a blocker, somewhere, like you have to have that level of psychological safety, comfort, whatever you want to call it, to be able to communicate that effectively, right? Without fear of like, is this going to break down the relationship? Is it going to affect this? Is it going to affect that? I guess that's what it comes down to a lot of the time, right? Is it's almost like without that psychological safety, it's a blocker to communication.
Yeah.
And without the communication, it's kind of...
There's no performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you just become yes men, and then that's not you're never going to be a high performing team internally or with external people if you're all just yes men or women. You know, you have to be able to say no, and you know, you all bring different areas of expertise. Otherwise, we wouldn't be going to external vendors. If I then don't listen to what you tell me, it's wasting my money, isn't it?
It's a really good thing to actually be a part of a team that has psychological safety, because quite often I'll seek an opinion of someone that I could probably put good money on would have a contrasting opinion with me and would have no problem in voicing it, because you learn so much more from that. And, you know, as I say, we delve into several different topic areas, but as long as like the feedback is given in a way that's helpful, you then get a better view on how you can change your own performance. So it's interesting knowing that, okay, right, I know the differences in the team, but I also know that they've got no problem in telling me certain things that might seem difficult in other places that don't have psychological safety. And then the outcomes I find are amplified because, whereas, you know, you could go somewhere else and you might just get everyone agree with you, doesn't actually achieve a lot. Might feel good. You feel like you've done a good job first time around. But unless you get that honest feedback that sometimes you need, then you're not really learning as much. So that's one takeaway that I definitely have found personally from experience in psychological safety, and actually helping me achieve better outcomes sooner.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting with the whole external people thing, because in that sense you can internally change the people in a team, obviously, but if you're looking for a supplier on something, you will instinctively be looking for someone who you quickly will build that psychological safety with.
Yeah,
you'll
true.
resonate better with people on the same wavelength as you.
Yeah.
I guess where it becomes exciting is to say, am I looking for someone that aligns with me, or am I looking for someone completely different? Maybe I want someone that I don't get on with so well,
Yeah, that's true.
or whatever. So you can kind of look for it, and again, if you're very self-aware, then you can know what you're looking for in someone. Like we wouldn't working with you. I think, you know, companies that will come to you go on your YouTube channel and you see you roasting people's websites. If you're looking for a yes man, you're not going to come to you, are you?
Yeah.
Right? Whereas that's exactly when one of the things that draws us to you is the fact that I feel like from the second we jump on something, if I say, what do you think of this? If you think it's rubbish, you're going to tell me it's rubbish.
Yeah.
So
that's the foundation of understanding, isn't it? Because otherwise, like for instance, with a website roast, you can see the intention behind it because of the understanding. I wouldn't sit there watching it and going, this guy just doesn't like me. This is personal, because you understand where the other person's coming from, and you can see where the feedback is coming from.
Yeah.
And it isn't you know, I'm just going to disagree because I don't like this person, or because I don't want to be helpful. It's actually the opposite.
I don't know how like psychologically safe a website roast makes people feel. I guess when we do them, there's like no psychological safety built up whatsoever. So I guess that comes down to like the whole self-awareness piece again, right? Of like, I actually wanted to come back to that self-awareness thing, because I find that like a really fascinating topic, and you know, it's something. Like I'm obsessed with self-awareness. I think it's so interesting, and I've been on my own journey with it just through kind of meditation was the biggest thing that helped me with it. But how do you guys kind of like for teams, you know, you see this a lot where there's very different levels of self-awareness in teams. Yeah. You know, like it's one of those things where you can't, it's almost funny, isn't it? Like where you kind of get people who are maybe just, I remember when I like just started kind of meditating, getting into self-development, and I would be like to people, oh, you're so unself-aware. And it's like, you kind of get this kind of ego driven thing. And then it's like, you're actually completely unaware of just how much of a dick you're being right now. Like, there's this irony to it. But like, how do you, because it's almost quite an uncomfortable thing, really, like self-awareness, isn't it? It can become quite uncomfortable. Like, how do you encourage that? Because I guess it's a cultural thing as well, right? You have to kind of foster this culture of self-awareness. Like, how do you go about doing that without it sounding kind of, because you can't, well, I guess you can, but you don't really want to say, oh, you have to meditate every morning, team, or like, how do you create that in teams?
Yeah, I guess there's different levels to it, once you're into the meditation space, like a spiritual self-awareness and all that sort of stuff. I won't go near that because
that brings perceptions, doesn't it? That's the thing. Yeah. I think sometimes people, they hear the word meditation and then they're like, oh God, or they might associate self-awareness with meditation and then instantly be put off.
Yeah, I think so. And that's probably why I'm saying I won't go there, because sort of a spiritual self-awareness, I think, is a it's something you do for yourself, right? In the work context, again, I think it is where these models really help, because again, you can pick any of them, and you can say, well, when you join this company, you have to do this psychometric or behavior assessment. That's just what you do, and you're giving people something that's based on millions of data points. So there's data that supports it. It's not airy-fairy stuff. You're saying when it's laid out, you say, well, these are why we're going to do it. This is what's in it for you. This is what you're going to get from a team. So you once you do those things, you're creating self-awareness without even knowing it, and then you move into how that works as a team. So just learning, like people. I wouldn't go near the whole, you join this team and you have to meditate together, because that's for some people and not for others.
Definitely.
But any model that's taken off in the world is because there's reality behind it.
Yeah.
So do that together and use it together.
Yeah.
And there you go. That's started the journey. You don't even have to call it self-awareness if you don't want to.
And I think it's like you say, knowledge, because one of the biggest drivers to start learning more about yourself is understanding what's around you. And I think when you're in a team, when you start to understand different team members, I think naturally you'll start to try to figure out where you fit within the dynamic and what you bring. So I actually think by developing an understanding of everything around you, other people, their preferences, and how other people operate, their strengths and development areas, you start to then create a better concept for what you bring, what you are, and how you fit within all of that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I don't want to get too like philosophical with this, but I do find it quite interesting how it does kind of come back to this. Like, I think with what you're saying with all of this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's almost like, to be, I think, fully self-aware, you kind of have to accept that, okay, cool, I've done this psychometric assessment. What you don't want to do is say that result on the psychometric assessment is the way to be. Like, I am the god of do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's where you then see other people who are different, and you're like, oh yeah, but their way is wrong. And it's like, no, actually there is no wrong way.
No.
Like, no result on a psychometric assessment is good or bad, or right or wrong. It's just different, and they all have different areas they can help with, and that. But that's quite a hard, because we're so led by right and wrong, good and bad, this and that, black, it's black and white, right? And I think when you see the world through that lens, it does create dysfunction and viewing things from, this person's wrong, this my view of the world is right. Yeah. And that's almost the kind of underlying thing, right? I don't know. Like, what do you guys think about that? Would you agree with that?
I think that that thought of my way is right, I guess, is the ultimate myth that self-awareness should be dispelling.
Yeah.
So, because your way, you're looking at how you are as a human, and we're all different. And actually, I think now people understand diversity is a really good thing. So I think this was probably more of an issue historically when a leader should be a certain way. I think now we can know that no matter what your style and preferences, you can be an amazing leader. You just do it in a different way. So, as you were saying that, asking the question, I was thinking this is where you should do it with experts who know how to give you the maximum value from these assessments. If you just fill it in online and get a report, generally the reports are written quite well, and they'll say, you're good, this is how you work better with people in these preferences. But it's where I think doing this is like a facilitated thing with an expert. It's where the teaminess comes from. So
I guess that helps to take away the kind of awkwardness of it as well, really, doesn't it? When you've got like a facilitator to kind of guide through that process.
And that person that keeps coming back to, there's no rights or wrongs here.
Yeah.
You're also never stuck in one certain way of being. That's your preference. You can be anything you want to be for an amount of time. So a facilitator who can also like bring it to like be quite lighthearted with it. Like when there's a detailed question, go and joke and say, "Oh, let's ask the detailed question to Jane," because we know we're going to get a detailed answer, and joke. But actually, we're joking by bringing out her strengths. So and we'll say, well, let's not go to Jane for this creative one because Tom's much better at those things. And using tasks and activities which get you to see how you can use everyone's diversity.
Yeah. I like that. That's actually a really interesting point. I think like the whole kind of facilitator thing, because I guess and this is what you guys do, right? Is you're kind of bringing that not only the expertise, but also I think just like you say, the huge value in just there being a kind of because it almost like softens the blow for a lot of these things. It's like there's whether it's like teamed in a professional context or even like personal relationships, there are what's the word? Kind of there's like a history there. Maybe you've had an argument with someone in your team before, you don't like them, and it can be difficult to approach these things without having like someone on the side to,
It's always good if you're learning something new. It's always good to have someone that you would consider an expert to tell you about it, right? Like if I'm, I don't know, working out with my wife, and I tell her that her technique's poor, she'll probably just get angry at me. If a personal trainer told her the exact same thing, she'd be like, okay, because that person's an expert and I'm not in her eyes. So I think we are dangerously in the territory of promoting ourselves here, but it's where you do want to think about when you do these things, do you have expertise internally or do you need to go externally for the expertise? Or even if you have the expertise internally, is an external neutral perspective going to bring more value where they can point out things that if you haven't built enough psychological safety, so we're going all the way back there again. If you haven't got the psychological safety in the team, bring an external person in to do it because they can help build that safety. Yeah. If you are a really safe team, then do it yourself because you can, and you can say, it's really annoying when you do this because that's the preference, but I know that now, so we can have that conversation.
Love that.
Would be a lot more nuanced if I was a facilitator doing this, by the way. I keep saying if I don't like you and things like that. You'd never do that in a workshop. I'm just doing it for kind of effect here.
Love it. No, I mean I think that's probably a good place to end it actually, and I'll obviously link to your guys' website in the description below. So if anyone wants to check you out, and you got the podcast as well.
We do, yeah.
Do you want to plug the podcast? What's the podcast called?
It's the Learn, Grow, Succeed podcast. Nice. Very much in the same way in which this one has kind of gone. Tom delivers the material, really good stuff that you can take away and feel like, okay, I've learned something great. And I'll just come in with a comment every so often. But I like to think adds something. Hopefully,
Yeah, definitely add something.
The magic.
What was the quote from you today? Was what was it? If I know your style, I know you better, or something. It sounds like an Ed Sheeran song.
Yeah. I don't think that's a good thing.
It does sound like it could be an Ed Sheeran
Yeah,
song.
but we talk about topics within leadership, management, communication, personal development. So yeah, we're always creating content on the website, and usually if it's an article on the website, there is a podcast version. So, and in the same style as this, conversational. I feel like we learn something while we record them as well, which is always nice.
Yeah, bit of a ramble every now and again as well.
Love it. Well, yeah, highly encourage everyone to go check that out because, yeah, these guys put out some awesome stuff. So thank you both.
Cheers, mate.
I think it's
Thanks
been
for the
awesome.
invite.
And we'll speak soon.
Cheers.
Thanks.
See you later.